Hey Prolongevity group members, so today I'm going to talk about the evils of rice crackers, evil rice crackers, and the way that these are presented, and they're not healthy. I can show you why they're not healthy, but why they're presented by Diabetes UK, heavily sponsored by many food companies, as the perfect dietary snack for diabetics. After 10 weeks of Prolongevity, where essentially it was transformational. It took about 25 years off me, got me down to the sort of weight and fitness that I had in my mid-30s within 10 weeks, got me off double doses of blood pressure medication because I was suddenly found to be suffering from severe hypertension, which kills you basically. And so I'm feeling terrifically fit and healthy. So why bother carrying on? Well, I've only just snuck under from obese to overweight, and myself and Graham agreed that what we would do is roll the program on as a little bit of a sort of experiment to see if you adhere to his good advice and keep it going, how long would it take for you to get perfectly honed to have every indices looking good? So things like blood pressure, normal. Things like your visceral fat, normal. All of the waist measurements, etc., normal. BMI, normal. How long would it take? And we're going to see how we do that naturally and painlessly, because I think apart from getting over the sugar, the loss of sugar suddenly in 1 week, it's been an absolute joy moving on to this program. You enjoy life a lot better. It's not just about diet, it's about the whole lifestyle. So everything improves. I'll take you through all of those biometrics as they stand, and we're going to do it every 2 weeks because I don't want to bore you. But without further ado, let me just take you into the measurements. So when you saw me last, I was on week 10. So look at week 10. Still struggling on the blood pressure because we've got this blood pressure gauge here. So there I was on hypertensive, and then you can see it moving down, and I'm currently sort of in that blue zone in the evenings. My weight when I spoke to Graham was sticking around the 90, but a little bit of loss around the belly. And what's been happening is slight improvements around body fat muscle, because I've actually started exercising, something I haven't been doing properly, but doing proper exercise, good hard work on the bike. So we look at week 11 and then week 12. So week 11, you can see that, let me just take the weight into consideration. Beginnings of a little bit of loss, so starting to move the loss down, but steady in most factors really, very little change. And they said things would slow down. And this is the last week, week 12, and you can see that the weight then starts to move down again. And I went down pretty rapidly from about 90. I lost about nearly a kilogram, down to about 89.1, and my waist measurement has also started to move down. I'm looking less porky now. There's still a bit of a beer belly, but 101.5 versus 102. So we had like a static period, and now things are starting to shift again, and I'm probably, having moved a bit of fat into muscle, I'm now starting to burn fat again. But I really want to see if I can get my visceral fat down, and we'll see if that improves in the next session. But what's really important is the blood pressure measurement. So let's zoom back to week 10. And if you look at the blood pressure, I was struggling to get from elevated to normal. I was almost there, in the mornings, but in the evenings I was still way out. So let's have a look, and you can see there's a couple of periods in yellow of high blood pressure. So just to remind you, there's the typical medical scale that's used nationally, internationally. Yellow is not good. Blue is reasonably bad, but not terribly bad. And then there's normal, which is plain. So if we look at week 12, let's just skip, and you can see that it is possible to have high blood pressure whilst you're making progress, but I moved right down to safe overall as an average. So I'm looking at the average over the week. I think that's the most valid measurement. And the measurements are actually getting closer and closer. There's now less and less of a difference between morning and evening. We look at the gradient on that blood pressure. And this is really what I'm more concerned about. Not really concerned about the odd kilogram here and there, but what I am concerned about is coming off the single dose. I was originally on double dose of this blood pressure drug here, and I want to get off it completely, which my doctor said was impossible. And you know, essentially when we look at the evenings, I was still over there edging towards it, and then in week 12, I am now averaging within normal. It's the upper end of normal, so I'd still like to try and take that down a little bit more, and then we'll look at taking myself off the drugs with a bit of maybe GP advice. My GP is now talking to me after weeks and weeks of campaigning, and also talking with Graham as well for his counsel. This was why the blood pressure moved up. It was not just a little bit of stress, because it is quite stressful living under lockdown, but we think we missed a dose. So that shows that could. We had a big conversation in the morning. Did I take it? Did I not? And in the end, we thought I had taken it. I actually think I'd missed it. So I then took medication and got myself back under control the next day. So there you have it. Time for a rant. Okay, so this is a lovely little snack recommended on loads and loads and loads of diet sites. The better ones now have been enlightened, and what they do is they don't just look at the calories or the sugar or whatever, they look at the carbohydrates, because as we all know, what happens is those carbohydrates are converted into sugar. They're just complex sugar molecules. So every time you have a potato, eat some white rice, whoosh, you have a sugar spike. And that's exactly what these cause. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rattle around Diabetes UK's website. So let's take a look at Diabetes UK, a really nice section devoted to crackers, which of course a lot of their sponsors provide. And they claim they're very healthy, they've got fibre, they rail against things like salt and fat. There's a bit of section there in terms of keeping the fat out, and the fat content is seen as dangerous in the crackers, and the toppings that you can have, that's fine. But let's have a look at the individual crackers, and straight away you can see all they're doing is looking at sugar and salt and claiming that there's low calories. You see this a lot on health fad sites that are probably sponsored by food companies, but you know, claiming that they're low in calories when they're ignoring this figure here. So per 100 grams, that's 63% carbs, and as we know, carbs turns to sugar. It's just complex sugar molecules, and it breaks down and causes sugar spike. Hovis, very similar, 58%. And again, they're just focusing on the bad saturated fats, etc., which is nonsense. And then you've got Jacobs, 63%. So these are very high sugar content. You know, they're just not counting carbs as sugar. And this is one they class as healthy. And you can see that that has even more sugar, 66.6. But they claim it doesn't have any fat, it's nice and dry, etc., and very little sugar, tastes like cardboard. Let me tell you a little family history. Ryvita was what my mum, and she died of diabetes. She kept on injecting herself, and she eventually got infected, and that killed her due to an infection and rotting of her intestines, where she kept on injecting herself. And her favourite food for decades, from when she was diagnosed with diabetes in her late 30s, was Ryvita. And she was munching on those, filling herself up with sugar. And how dare Diabetes UK advertise that as healthy, but they do. And of course you've got more there. Nairns, rough oat cakes, they're all 60% carbs. And here we have the rice cracker, seen very, very favourably. Green, green, green in all their assessment, and it's actually got the highest amount of carbs. So this should be avoided. You know, if you've got any in your cupboards, crumble it up and feed it to the pigeons. They love getting fat, but don't feed them too much or else they won't be able to fly. So that ends my rant of the video, and I hope you've been enlightened and will never eat a rice cracker again unless you want to get fat and have diabetes, in which case I've got a spare packet here, and you're welcome. You know, survival is optional. Anyway, that's it from me. All the best from me and Prolongevity, of which you can see I'm become, after being one of the greatest cynics, one of the greatest fans. So on that note, goodbye.